Hello and welcome back to Roz Night Squeeze the Quo. I am Roz and I appreciate you being here. And I would like to give a special shout out to my 2 subscribers. Thank you. Thank you very much. And if you would like to be a subscriber, please do. You're welcome to. Hit the button, hit the bell, hit the like, hit the notification. You guys know the drill. So as you can see, I have a paper here and I've put some color behind there because I feel like with this such a heavy topic that we're doing, it's nice to kind of look at it and see it not so black and white and put a little color in it, especially talking about these heavy subject matters. And I'm going to give another warning for the explicit language I'm going to be using. I'm using it because it is on the research paper, as well as it is a heavy topic. Therefore, the need to mention the unmentionable to make it mentionable. So we'll also look into the affidavit of Brett Payne and also look at another affidavit just to show the difference in the two. And this is the Letitia Staunch case. But first, I wanted to talk to you a little bit more about Stranger. This is the one paper here where it's looking into sexual homicide versus non-sexual homicide, as well as stranger sexual homicide, and is it actual thing? And the reason why that is brought up is because the media, and it happened a long time ago, where this whole stranger danger came about. So I'm going to bring that up here real quick. And as I mentioned before, I got my master's, and this is one of the textbooks we had to get. Karen Terry, Sexual Offenses and Offenders. And in the book, she went ahead and did a little research on what started this whole, just the history of sexual psychopath. And here on page 32 to 33, she talks about from 1936 to 1976, the rise of this sexual psychopath. And I'll read a little section of it. Offenses such as exposition did not warrant severe sentences, yet this was seen as a gateway action into more serious deviant acts. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover publicized his opinions during the 1930s and 1940s by describing degenerate sex offenders as one of the most severe problems facing children, despite the relatively low crime rate at that time. The FBI wanted families of looming stranger danger. These warnings continued through the 1960s. Parole was considered one source of recidivism, as many of the child sexual killers were repeat offenders who had been released from prison early on parole. Politicians, too, were using the public sphere about sex crimes to promote their own campaigns. In Minnesota, for example, a young girl went missing in 1938 and was allegedly kidnapped, molested, and killed by a sexual pervert. Though her body was never found, one gubernatorial candidate claimed that he would protect the community from such unfortunate but dangerous wretches. Should he be elected? And upon his election, sexual psychopathy laws were passed unanimously in 1939. And then it describes more into the 1940s and 1950s about this huge civil commitment under sexual psychopathy laws. They started passing these laws, and at the same time, mental hospitals had lax commitment standards for all those perceived as a social threat. So that flooded these mental hospitals, and that caused a whole reactionary moment of time. And here we are in 2023. So I just wanted to give a little history on that, of the stranger danger. So the first paper I'm going to go into, and usually for my other videos, I have video and then I talked. This time it's just going to be straight talking. I'm just going to do these papers. I'm going to go through with them with you, and please comment and let me know if you have any questions. I'll be happy to answer them as to the best of my knowledge. If I don't know, I'll find out. And I hope you enjoy learning about this, because it's very important, I feel, that we become more informed, because there is a lot of misinformation. And excuse me, in that interview with Ann Burgess and David, I keep calling him David, his name is Gary Bucato, on how even though MPD said there was no signs of sexual assault that we know of, does not mean it was not sexually motivated, hence the stabbings. And I didn't address the third person that was there, and that is a former FBI agent, and he kind of came in the last second to be on that panel. So just keep that in mind as we go through these papers. I'm going to go through this one pretty thoroughly. The next one I have a talking point, and the third one I'll just go graze over. But I definitely want to go into the affidavit as well. So let's go ahead and start the first slide. So here we go. Differences between sexual and non-sexual homicides of women in the United States. Findings from the National Violent Death Reporting System. And this is from the Journal of Interpersonal Violence, 2022. The publisher is Sage, and it's an original research. And you can check for updates on the site where I got it from. And these are the two researchers on this topic. And let me go ahead here. Let me get my bearings straight. All right, so let's look at the abstract. Sexual homicide is the most severe outcome of sexual violence and disproportionately affects women. While SH is rare, less than 1% in the U.S., and gravely understudied, it is among the most violent, feared, and well-publicized forms of murder. Thus, examining predictors is pertinent to identifying targets for prevention and response efforts. Secondary analysis of 2015 to 2018 National Violent Death Reporting System data on 6,461 female homicide victims, ages 20 through 64, was conducted to determine if SH represents a unique killing characterized by specific offender, victim, and incident profiles. Law enforcement and coroner medical examiner narratives were reviewed to identify cases with sexual elements. Logistic regression estimated odds ratio with 95% confidence intervals. So I'm going to stop right there because I want to look at the affidavit, because as it just said, the paper we're reading, it looks at law enforcement and the coroner report. Now I found it interesting, which is why I brought it up in my previous video with Kathy being interviewed, how she just let us know that there were noticeable stabbings and that a very good question was asked, were the bodies near each other? And she could not clarify that. She could not say anything. She totally closed off with that. So let's look into this. And I kind of want to go through this first so that we can kind of read what's going on here and then listen to the paper, the research papers, and what they look for and what is needed in order to get accurate data. So the below information is provided by Brett Payne, who is a duly anointed, qualified, and acting peace officer within the county of Latah, state of Idaho. Brett Payne is employed by MPD in the official capacity or position of Corporal, CPL, and has been a trained and qualified peace officer for approximately 4 years. CPL Payne is being assisted by members of the Idaho State Police and agents of the FBI. On November 13th, 2022, at approximately 4 p.m., which the phone call of the unconscious person came in at 11:58. Moscow PD, Sergeant Blaker, and I responded to 1122 King Road. Hereafter, the King Road residents to assist with scene security and processing of a crime scene associated with 4 homicides. Upon our arrival, the ISP forensic team was on scene and was preparing to begin processing the scene. MPD Officer Smith, one of the initial responding officers to the incident, advised he would walk me through the scene. Smith and I entered the King Road residence through the bottom floor door on the north side of the building. Smith and I then walked upstairs to the second floor. Smith directed me down the hallway to the west bedroom on the second floor, which I later learned through Xana's driver's license and other personal belongings found in the room was Xana Cornodal, hereafter Cornodal's room. Just before this room, there was a bathroom door on the south wall of the hallway. As I approached the room, I could see a body, later identified as Cornodal, lying on the floor. Cornodal was deceased with wounds which appeared to have been caused by an edged weapon. So how was he able to see that? Were her articles of clothing on? Were they torn apart? How was he able to see the wounds of an edged weapon? How was he able to differentiate that? Has he had experience of seeing these types of wounds before? Also in the room was a male, later identified as Ethan Chapin, hereafter Chapin. Chapin was also deceased with wounds later determined. Autopsy report provided by Spokane, which, by the way, to my knowledge, the defense still does not have that report. And here, excuse me about that, is redacted. Okay? County Medical Examiner dated December 15th, 2022, to be caused by sharp force injuries. Now, I find this interesting because I read this before I did a little practice run through, and I realized that we know that Xana, just before this room, there was a bathroom door on the south wall of the hallway, which when we further go into upstairs, he brings that up as well. Just before this room, there was a bathroom door on the south wall of the hallway. As I approached the room, I could see a body later identified as Cornodal lying on the floor. Was she lying on the floor next to the bed, under the bed, at the foot of the bed, half on the bed? She was lying on the floor, all the way on the floor. And then for Chapin, they don't tell us how he is at all. We don't know anything. We just know that he was in the room. That's totally left out. We don't know if his article of clothing are torn apart. We just know that it was sharp force injuries. Sharp force injuries doesn't mean stabbing. Sharp force injuries, does that mean beating? Hit with something? A bat? Another type of weapon? I then followed OFC Smith upstairs to the third floor of the residence. The third floor consisted of 2 bedrooms and 1 bathroom. The bedroom on the west side of the floor was later determined to be Kaylee. I later learned from review of Officer Noon's body camera, there was a dog in the room when Moscow police initially responded. The dog belonged to Kaylee and her ex-boyfriend, which is Jack Decor. I found out from an interview with him on the 13th that he and Kaylee shared the dog. Smith then pointed out a small bathroom on the east side of the 3rd floor. The bathroom shared a wall with Madison Mogan's, hereafter Mogan, bedroom, which was situated on the southeast corner of the 3rd floor. So both times he has specifically mentioned the bathroom. So was there cleanup going on in the bathroom? Because it's brought out both times. I don't know if that's standard procedure. I would be interested to know if anyone knew. But I find it that it is specifically pointed out that there's the bathroom, and then here's the room. As I entered this bedroom, I could see 2 females in the single bed in the room. Both Kaylee and Maddie were deceased with visible stab wounds. I also later noticed what appeared to be a tan leather knife sheath lying on the bed next to Mogan's right side when viewed from the door. The sheath was later processed and had K-bar, USMC, and the United States Marine Corps, yada yada. Not disrespect, but I'm just moving forward. The IS lab later located a single source of male DNA suspect profile left on the button snap of the knife sheath. So I just want to go back and say this. I could see 2 females in the single bed in the room. They were both deceased with visible stab wounds. So they're in bed together. How are they in bed together? Were they neatly next to each other? Were they on top of each other? Were they facing each other? Lying next to each other? On their sides? That would be very interesting to know. Also, how can you see the visible stab wounds? Unless they had parts of their clothes torn. I mean, if they're wearing clothes and you stab, just try to visualize someone looking into a room, seeing visible stab wounds on 2 females from a doorway. Moving forward. As part of the investigation, numerous interviews were conducted by MPD, ISP, detectives, and FBI. 2 of the interviews included BF and DM. Which I find interesting that the victims get full names and then referred to by their last name. And then the investigation interviews, it's BF and DM. And then Jack Decor, he's redacted. I don't know if that's standard procedure. Be happy if anyone who knows to let me know. And let's see here. BF's bedroom. Let's see if they bring up the bathroom on these ones. BF's bedroom was located on the east side of the first floor of the King Road residence. Based on numerous interviews conducted by MPD officers, ISP detectives, and FBI agents, as well as my review of evidence, I have learned the following. So they don't bring up their bedrooms at all. Or the bathroom, nothing like that. So we'll go back to what we're focusing on, which is sexual versus non-sexual homicide. And let me know if you like the color behind the paper. Differences between SH and non-SH. And can I just say something? There was no meat and potatoes in that Exhibit A. Nothing. No details. No nothing. It was a bunch of almost just fluff. Now, when we look at this research papers, you're going to see details. You're going to see the meat and potatoes. We're more likely to be single, have a substance abuse problem, or engaged in prostitution. SH suspects were more likely to be male. As an illicit substance in the preceding hours, or use an illicit substance in the preceding hours, or had recent contact with police. SH was more likely to occur in a hotel-motel by asphyxiation, or be precipitated by another serious crime. Findings advance our understanding of SH victim, suspect, and incident profiles, which can help to better inform police investigative practices and crime prevention strategies, interventions, as well as to improve how SH cases are managed in our correctional programs for offenders who have had the opportunity for release back in society. So it is very important, hopefully the coroner is able to give adequate information as a learning point, a teaching point, and therefore teach other people, females and even males, how to protect themselves. These 4 victims were at home. They were at home. They weren't in some random place. They were in their community, at their university, ready to, well, Kaylee already graduated. Maddie was ready to, and then you had the other 2. I want to say they were in their sophomore or junior year. I want to say sophomore year. So they were known in the community, and Ethan was in a fraternity. Zana, Maddie, and Kaylee were no longer in a sorority. Introduction. Sexual violence is a serious public health issue that disproportionately affects females. According to the 2015 National Intimate Partner in Sexual Violence Survey, more than 52 million women in the U.S. experience some form of sexual violence in their lifetime. 44% of women compared to 25% of men. Occasionally, deviant sexual behaviors can trigger life-threatening violence and end in the murder of the victim. These incidents are referred to as sexual homicides, SH. SH is a rare but often highly publicized form of murder. Its prevalence is difficult to ascertain due to its infrequency, lack of a universally accepted definition, and insufficient crime details contained in most homicide databases. However, based on studies conducted in several countries, it is estimated that sexual homicides represent between 1 and 4% of all homicides, but have been decreasing, including in the U.S., where the prevalence is less than 1%. And that could also be true in order for them to get their data, it has to be written in the proper way in order for it to be caught. So you can research on it, keep that in mind. Despite its rarity, SH is usually considered one of the most brutal and gruesome criminal acts. For this reason, these violent deaths typically receive substantial media coverage and provoke widespread fear about their occurrence in the community. Subsequently, further investigation into this unique homicide is warranted and vitally important in the fields of criminal justice and violent crime prevention, especially because it is studied far less than any other type of murder. Definition of sexual homicide. Lack of a uniform definition of SH makes comparing rates across studies and between countries difficult. Since the 19th century, researchers have made efforts to identify what constitutes SH. However, many have debated the true definition. So, these 3 names keep coming up in this particular paper, and they're just using it as an example. They're not trying to say anything, but they're just using it as an example. But as you listen, you're going to hear what they say compared to what other papers are saying, which had me look them up, and we'll get into that further. Some studies have defined SH as an intentional killing with evidence of a sexual element, while others believe that sexual gratification from the act of killing should not be included in the definition. The most widely accepted operationalized definition of SH in research was developed by the FBI, and this is back in 1988. It suggests that a case should be considered SH if at least one of the following characteristics is evident. 1. Attempted or completed sexual intercourse. 2. Sexual interest admitted by the offender. 3. Attire or lack of attire. 4. Exposure of sexual body parts. 5. Sexual positioning of the body. 6. Insertion of foreign objects into body cavities. 7. Substitute sexual activity. 8. Semen on or nearby the body. Or 9. Sadistic fantasies reported by the offender. So I'm interested in number 8 as well, because we did see forensics there, ISP, through the media, through them recording them. We see them through the window, getting samples like on the wall and on the table and on the banister. So hopefully they used those swabs on the bodies and inside the rooms, especially in that bathroom. We'll have to wait and see when and if this goes to trial. Sexual homicides compared to non-sexual homicides. Despite considerable media coverage of SH, little scientific attention has been devoted to it compared to other homicides. Nevertheless, previous studies have observed uniqueness in the characteristics and circumstances surrounding SH. For example, demographic characteristics of both the victim and perpetrator were determined to be important predictors of SH. So demographic is like the university. People at that university. People within their friend group. People that were around them. Women are more likely to be victims of SH, whereas men are more often both SH perpetrators and NSH victims. Additionally, studies conducted in France and Scotland found that, compared to NSH, younger victims and offenders both had higher odds of being involved in SH. Okay. Happy with that. These findings are supported by descriptive SH studies conducted in Canada and the US. Research shows that the relationship between victim and suspect is a key factor associated with SH perpetrated against women despite inconsistencies among findings. So a relationship between the victim and the suspect. Relationship. A Finnish study conducted in 2009 revealed that an attack on a stranger was equally uncommon for SH and NSH offenders. Conversely, several recent studies in various countries found that strangers and acquaintances were more likely to perpetrate SH. Other researchers discovered that acquaintances and intimate partners were more common offenders of NSH, these two. Additional unique characteristics of SH include the location of the incident and the weapon used in the killings. Across studies assessing location, which is what Gary and Anne were talking about. The weapon used for the killings. Was not clear consensus about typical incident location. However, the most common locations were the victim's place of residence and outdoors. While SH often occurred in public in other countries, homicides of the same nature in the U.S. often took place inside private residencies. Killing methods have also varied across studies, although most revealed that strangulation and personal weapons are more common in SH and firearms are used more frequently in NSH. Extant literature highlights prostitution and criminal history as other factors that increase SH risk. Some research has shown that prostitution is an important risk factor when comparing SH and NSH, while others found association at the bi-rate level but was attenuated in multivariable analysis. In terms of criminal background, investigators have discovered that sexual murders tend to have criminal histories or have been convicted of a violent crime. Now, thinking back to Lauren at the University of Utah, he was a sexual offender, a felony sexual offender, and he was on parole, working at a college bar at a university and roaming around campus. Use of alcohol and other substances by the victim or offender can contribute to an increased risk of SH. However, there is no consensus among studies conducted. Found no differences in intoxication between sexual and non-sexual groups of Swedish victims. French and Chinese investigators learned that the sexual murderers they studied were less likely to be intoxicated during the crime than other homicide offenders, which makes sense once you learn a little bit more. Whereas a Finnish study showed that sexual murderers have a higher propensity for substance abuse. Purpose of the current study. The overall intent of this paper is to present meaningful findings that aid criminal justice, law enforcement, and SH preventionists in improving how SH cases are managed in correctional programs for offenders who have the opportunity for release back into society. Much of the SH literature published in the last 10 years have explored SH versus non-homicidal sex offenses. This study contributes to the existing literature in several ways. First, many of these studies have been limited by their unrepresentativeness and small sample sizes, and there has been less focus on the differences and similarities with other homicides. This exploratory study expounds on prior research by including a nationally representative sample of homicides of U.S. females aged 20 to 64. Second, to our knowledge, only 3 studies comparing SH to NSH were published in the past 10 years. Here we go again. These researchers observed notable differences their study findings, but all concluded that the characteristics and circumstances precipitating sexual murder are unique from other types of homicide. For these reasons, broadening the knowledge base on SH is critically important. The current project expands the growing literature on SH by building upon prior studies, such as U.S. studies conducted by Chan et al. 13, 15, and 19. And the only published study that used data from the National Violent Death Reporting System, the NVDRS, to explore SH, to explore differences between SH and NSH. So here we go. Hypothesized that SH of women in the U.S. is distinct from NSH in terms of offender, victim, and incident characteristics. So you have your hypothesis, which is a essential part of it being scientific. You need a hypothesis and preferably a null hypothesis. And in the other study that I'm just going to graze through real quick that was done in the United Kingdom, they clearly state their hypothesis and their null. Methods. We're nerding out. Methods. This study used data collected by the NVDRS in 2002. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, launched the NVDRS in 6 states to better understand and prevent suicide and homicide. The system is ongoing, state-based, active surveillance system that collects data on all violent deaths and their circumstances. As of 2018, they included all 50 states, including District of Columbia and Puerto Rico, serving as a source of data for violence research and prevention. The system links data from death certificates, law enforcement reports, coroner and medical examiner reports, and toxicology reports using standardized protocols. Homicide cases can involve more than one offender and more than one victim. Mass. So see how important it is for LE reports? See how important that is? And the coroner? Just a little FYI, I did send an email to Kathy. We'll see what happens. I don't know what the detail is. If you're allowed to receive a coroner report, it is public information. Not on a website, but you have to reach out specifically to them. But it also depends on the case. So they may have to wait until after the case is closed or it's current. With my profession, what I do as a licensed professional, if and when I do get that, I would definitely follow the rules that are part of it. So you won't see me leaking anything out, because that would be disrespectful to the victims and the victims' families. I hope the reason why NPD said there was no signs of sexual assault and that they redacted all that information to protect the victims, I would like to believe that. Moving forward. Study sample and procedure. Data collected from 2015 to 2018 for all homicide cases involving female descendants aged 20 to 64 were extracted from the NVDRS to perform secondary analysis. This subgroup was selected because sexual violence and SH are substantially more common among women than men. Moreover, including male homicide victims in this study may not broaden our understanding of distinctions between SH and NSH beyond trivial differences based on gender. Females under age 20 or over age 65 were not included because sexual victimization of children and seniors represent a distinct crime process warranting specialized examination beyond the scope of this study. Love that. Therefore, our findings cannot be generalized to these excluded populations. Very good. This paper focuses on SH, which is defined as homicide with a sexual element. SH is not a measure that is captured in the MVDRS. Therefore, a content analysis was conducted by 2 researchers, which consisted of... I'm in love with this paper. And let me just wet my whistle. Reviewing the LE and CME narratives of target homicide cases to identify situational information that explained or described the incident. Since there were 6,461 cases that met the inclusion criteria before the review began, machine learning techniques were employed to narrow the search results. Statistical analysis software was used to perform a text word search and extract narratives of the cases that contained sexual element keywords from a predetermined list, which was based on criterion from the widely utilized definition of SH. Additionally, a CDC program was used to identify additional words and phrases associated with sexual element keywords, which expanded the list of search terms to make it as exhaustive as possible. After applying the text search to both narrative types, the sample was reduced to 671 possible SH cases. Narratives of these cases were reviewed by the authors to eliminate false positives and code the new SH variable. Coding by the 2 reviewers was compared, and all discrepancies were discussed, reconciled, and coded to consensus. This process yielded a final sample of 324 SH and 6,137 NSH cases representing diverse backgrounds: socioeconomics, age, race, ethnicity, geography. Precipitating circumstances were known for 91.7% of SH cases, and 86.1% of NSH cases were stratified by homicide group of victim, suspect, and incident characteristics. Now, just remembering what you heard on and read, if you're watching, what Brett Payne put in his report. Does any of that, do you think any of those words that he used would be able to be extracted for this particular study? Onwards. Measures. Sexual homicide is the dependent variable, which was coded as 1 equal yes, and 0 equals no. There are 3 groups of independent variables for the characteristics and known circumstances related to the victim, suspect, and homicide itself. Table 1, which we'll look into. These measures were chosen because previous empirical research has shown that they are important homicidal risk factors of and necessary for comparing SH to other forms of murder and non-homicidal sexual offenses. For precipitating circumstances variables, known and unknown available, were grouped together because the NVDRS cannot determine whether a circumstance did not occur or occurred but was not discovered during the LE or CME investigation. Victim demographic variables included age, race, ethnicity, marital status, and educational level. 6 dichotomous victim-specific precipitating circumstances were also assessed to examine potential risk factors that may have facilitated the murder. So they used substance abuse, alcohol, use of alcohol hours before the incident, mental health problems, depression, bipolar, because the media loves to use this. So therefore, we have to put that in there. As with Gary mentioned, when it comes to mass murder, especially when using a not using a firearm. Geez Louise, sorry about that. When not using a firearm, they are least likely to have any type of mental health attached to that. There could be a psychotic moment or a brief second, but as for it being a mental health issue of why these mass murders happen without using a weapon or a firearm, it's not mental health. And I brought that up in my other video. Moving on. So here is the table 1 with the characteristics that we kind of just went over. All the demographics, all the variables. And here is characteristic of the suspect: location, method of killing, the victim-suspect relationship, and this is the percentage here. Okay, so spouse, current boyfriend or girlfriend, person known and acquainted, family member, ex, stranger. Related to intimate partner violence, arguments led to violence or homicide. Homicide was precipitated by another serious crime. Look at this. Random act 3. And here, prostitution or prostitution-related activities played a role. And 6, experienced violence in the month preceding the homicide. Suspect demographics include, which we just went through. All right. Person known, acquaintance, or stranger, we went through all those. Several variables related to the homicide incident itself was measured as well. So the location, house, apartment, outdoors, motor vehicle, office building, type of weapon included, firearm, sharp instrument, blunt instrument, asphyxiation, a personal weapon or other, and incident-specific precipitating circumstances. So we went through those. So they used the chi-square test to help do exploratory variable examination, and used the independent sample t-test to assess the differences in victim, suspect, and incident characteristics. And they use a multivariable logistic regression model to estimate adjusted odds ratio with 95% confidence interval. And here is the study sample, which we went through, how they went through all that. And there were several statistically significant differences between SH and NSH that reflect the sample's diversity. SH victims were more likely to be white, single, never married, and to have had a substance abuse problem, used alcohol in the hours before the homicide, had a mental health problem, been involved in prostitution-related activities, experienced violence in the month before the murder, and had an alcohol problem. SH suspects were more likely to be male, have contact with police within the past 12 months, and used alcohol and or illicit drug in the hours before the homicide. So that'll be interesting to see if the SH suspects were more than likely to be male, have contact with the police in the past 12 months. So that would be interesting to see if anyone in the university or in Moscow within the past 12 months in 2021 of November had any type of contact with the police. And we do know it was a party house, so there was alcohol, and we do know there was illicit drugs, allegedly, hours before the homicide. This part right here, prostitution-related activities, if you don't, I highly recommend to go watch Truth and Transparency with Lana, my apologies. And she went in and she looked at how a lot of the females there in sororities were into being sugar babies for sugar daddies. That is more of an escort, meaning you go, you have dinner, they take you shopping. Intercourse is more than likely not involved. It doesn't mean it isn't. There is a difference between escorting and prostitution. Just so most people are not aware of this, especially males. I hate to say it because I've talked to males about this. Women who are on the street prostituting themselves are doing it because they're being forced to. They're being forced to. And they act nice to you is because they have to, not because they actually do like you. They are forced to go out there and do that. They don't want to, but they're in a violent dynamic that forces them to be out there. And some of them are trafficked as young as 9 and throughout their teens. And they've been lured out of their homes by a boyfriend or a uncle type figure to help them with their situation. These victims are scouted out by these traffickers And that's what I went to school for, to learn more about. I mentioned that in another video. And I'm doing a personal project about that was a bigger scope, a little bit more in depth. But then this came along, and here we are. I went on a little tangent there. In the terms of homicide itself, SH was more likely to occur outdoors and be precipitated by another serious crime or abuse neglect by a caregiver. The SH victims was more likely to be an acquaintance of the suspect and killed by asphyxiation, hanging, strangulation, or suffocation. So it will be interesting to see once the trial, if it does, to see the autopsy report, if we ever get to see it, if this ever happened. Conversely, an argument or a conflict between the incident was less likely in SH than NSH. Victim characteristics associated with sexual homicide. In the crude analysis, 2 demographic characteristics and all 6 precipitating circumstances were associated with SH. Associations with race, ethnicity, marital status, and substance abuse problems and prostitution remained significant after adjustment. On average, women who were American Indian, Alaskan Native, Asian Pacific Islander, or 2 or more races had 74% higher odds of SH than white women, compared to married women. Those who were single, never married, experienced 70% higher odds of death. So that is interesting. And as Steve, Kaylee's dad, said, her injuries were more significant. I wonder if that has anything to do with it. And we know that Kaylee and Maddie were at the corner bar. They went to the grub truck. Maddie looked like she was having a good time. She looked like she had a little extra, which Kaylee, you could tell when she was talking. She had a couple drinks. No, you're not breaking the law there. You're 21 years old. They're walking. They had a driver. And I don't know if that was something that they did, that one was able to have a little bit more than the other, while the other one was on a lookout. But Kaylee, during most of that grub truck footage, was on the phone. And here's some more differences in incident characteristics between homicide groups. So method of killing: hanging, strangulation, sharp instrument, blunt instrument, personal weapons, victim suspect relationship, spouse, current boyfriend, girlfriend, person known, acquaintance, ex-spouse, ex-boyfriend, girlfriend, stranger, family member. Bivrit analysis revealed that gender and 3 precipitating circumstances were significantly associated with SH. Based on multivariable analysis, men were 2.5 times more likely than women to commit SH. Suspects who had police contact in the preceding 12 months, which we brought that up earlier in here, and those who were illegal substances in the hours before the homicide presented higher odds of committing SH. So there, it's all right. In the crude analysis, all 6 modus operandi precipitating circumstances were associated with SH, and 5 remained statistically significant in the multivariable logistic regression. In comparison to a house or apartment, SH was 3 times more likely to occur in a motel hotel. Compared to firearms, all other killing methods presented greater odds of being used in SH. Asphyxiation was 13 times more likely, and a personal weapon was 11 times more likely. So this is interesting. The odds of SH were 2 times higher than any another crime preceding the homicide. Killing an acquaintance presented higher odds than murdering a wife or a girlfriend. So killing an acquaintance. Brian Koberger was not an acquaintance. No one knew of him. Even Christy, Kaylee's mom, said it's not going to be some rando. And we kind of went through all this already with the discussion. It disproportionately affects women. Let's see here. The primary contribution of this article is a better understanding of the specific risk factors and precipitating circumstances associated with SH. And we kind of went through the characteristics. It was highest among women who were single, never married, had a substance abuse problem, or were involved in prostitution. Susceptibility of SH among some women may be due to lifestyle behaviors that make them more prone to victimization. The current study revealed that over 1/4 of the SH victims assessed had a substance abuse problem, and more than 20% were suspected of using alcohol in the hours before their murder. Studies highlighted by indicate that SH suspects may identify these vulnerabilities prior to selecting them as targets. So that they're chosen for that reason. And then it talks about prostitution, which I highly doubt any of those females were. But you never know. I don't know if it's... You never know. Just with what Truth and Transparency had found, that was more of an escorting. But you never know. And it's just a 20% of them were. And the discrepancy may be because the number of descendants involved in prostitution in the present study. Nevertheless, there is consensus among researchers that prostitution is an important variable to consider when comparing SH to NSH. The nature of prostitution puts most of these women in high-risk situations. Further, they are specifically targeted by some offenders because prostitutes are generally known to be nomadic and less likely to notify friends or family of their whereabouts, which does not involve Kaylee and Manny and Zena. These factors increase the likelihood of sexual violence and death. And that's what does happen with these prostitutes and these women and children and males who are trafficked. They are definitely targeted by these specific perpetrators for that reason, because they're considered almost like a throwaway, unfortunately. Suspect characteristics. Extant research suggests that the sexual murderer is a distinct type of offender, distinguishable from other homicide offenders and non-homicidal violent sexual offenders. The present study corroborated this assertion and found that SA suspects were most often male, used substances before the homicide, and had a criminal history. However, the SH offenders we assessed did not differ significantly from non-sexual murders by age, race, ethnicity, history of victim abuse, or mental illness, and has been reported by several other researchers. Comprehensive systematic reviews conducted by, as well as, revealed that SH offenders tend to have alcohol and other drug disorders or used at least one of these substances before committing SH. Our findings support this discovery to an extent. Based on multivariable logistic regression, the odds of SH were statistically higher among offenders who had used illicit substance in the hours leading up to the homicide compared to those who had not. Further, while only 60% of SH offenders were suspected of using alcohol in the hours before the homicide, less than 10% of NSH murderers had done so. However, there was no statistically significant association observed in the multivariable. And let's see. I think we got the majority of this. We do have to look at, though, the circumstantial information due to unsolved crimes, and not all relevant information of the murder could be obtained from the cases, as was mentioned earlier. All right, incident characteristics. Research shows that most of the differences between SH and NSH concern modus operandi. And there's these two again. The current study is no different. In some samples, SH was associated with location, method of killing, victim-suspect relationship, and the incident being precipitated by another serious crime. Our findings support other researchers' assertion that incident variables are important for the desegregation SH. So they're kind of going against what they're saying. Consistent with previous research, the large proportion of SH occurred in a house or apartment. This finding dispels the belief that women are safer when at home than elsewhere. Hypothesize that this is because the same features attracting a burglar probably make the home more appealing to sex offenders as well. However, when compared to a residence, hotel, motel was a significantly more probable location for SH in the present study. This corroborates who found that NSH occurred in a private or residential location significantly more often than SH. Collectively, these findings highlight the need to consider location when investigating homicides to determine likelihood of sexual motivation. All right. We're almost to the end here. In terms of mechanisms used to kill, our study revealed that asphyxiation and personal weapons were significantly more common weapons in the commission of SH. This is consistent with other studies where sexual murderers who often strangled their victims or used personal weapons. The odds of strangulation, suffocation, hanging in our study were 13 times higher than the use of a firearm. The odds of a personal weapon were 11 times greater. It is unclear why these methods are used more frequently with SH, but this association could be related to the personal nature of sex crimes as well as the suspect's anger toward women and desire to continue wielding power and control over the victim until her death. Which, as Gary was saying, how a lot of these types of crimes kind of catapulted once women were given equal rights. As he said, it was more of a brittle working class males who took offense to this. And those working class males back then had children, and then they have children, and so on and so forth. Much of the existing research found that SH offenders frequently targeted strangers, found that SH was 6.5 times more likely to be committed against a stranger, and this variable is one of the strongest predictors of SH in their analysis. In contrast, the present studies show that SH of an acquaintance, such as friend, roommate, schoolmate, and co-worker, was more likely, which was the only statistically significant victim. Statistically significant suspect relationship in our multivariable logistic regression model. Differences in how SH was defined could attribute to existed distinctions between our sample and other studies. Nevertheless, our findings suggest that focusing police investigations on acquaintances of SH victims more than on strangers or boyfriends, husbands is important in the U.S. Nevertheless, our findings suggest that focusing police investigations on acquaintances of SH victims more than on strangers or boyfriends' husbands is important in the U.S. compared to other countries where SH of a stranger tends to be more common. So in other countries, it is more of a stranger, which could be just the way that they've been doing their investigative work. I don't know, it's overseas, it's a different culture, but it can't be that much different. But moving forward, and thankfully this paper does do their limitations, which is very important to do. While this study provides new information on differences between SH and NSH in the US and used as nationally representative data set, there were several limitations noted. First, these results should be reviewed as preliminary given the challenges of identifying SH cases from LE and SME narratives in the NVDRS. The dataset does not always include pertinent victim, suspect, and incident information relevant to assessing cases. For instance, paraphilic disorders, voyeurism, pedophilia are underdocumented in the NVDRS. Voyeurism, that's also part of stalking. That house was up And anyone could look in there. The surveillance of that house was not very safe. There was no natural protection whatsoever. It was just out in the open. Therefore, the role these disorders play in SH cannot be estimated from these data. Precipitating circumstance data is limited for homicides due to ongoing investigations and limited findings from the investigation. Body was found, but with related circumstances unknown. So no documentation, no work into the body was done. No little extra details were given. No understanding of how their clothes were, how the bodies were laid, were the bodies close to each other, how are they positioned, what type of weapons were used, so on and so forth. Our analysis attempted to address this limitation by only comparing cases with known circumstances in both groups, but doing so reduced the number of both cases. Second, although it may mostly be at random, some suspect and incident variables had high levels of missing data pertinent to this study. This was only primarily because the national clearance rate of homicides in the U.S. is only about 60%, according to the FBI in 2017. Therefore, there are many homicide cases in which the offender and precipitating circumstances were not identified. Third, according to Brigard, coding homicide as sexual when the only qualifying characteristic is the victim was found naked or partially nude could have led to some false positives. He argues that instead, okay, this is this guy again, selecting cases if they meet only one of the FBI criteria. Multiple criteria are necessary to reduce false positives and identify true cases of SH. However, several studies have classified SH cases using the same definition used in the current study, that is based on meeting at least one FBI criterion. And this is an older. And these, it's better that it's more up to date. These ones definitely is better, but you want more up to date. But it's good to know how it was conducted back in the day. And have you made progress? Have you been able to grow and develop a better methodology? That's what these are really about. Another limitation associated with this study is the potential problem of multiple comparison tests. This increases in the family-wise error rate. A cross-reported statistical analysis was not controlled. Nevertheless, most of the group differences and associations were statistically significant at low alpha levels, p less than 0.001. Further, we consider this exploratory research relatively preliminary and encourage replication in future studies. So I like that. This is preliminary. Please look into it, add to it, and let us know. And then the conclusion. So, pretty much what we all just went through. Collectively, this knowledge has important practical implications for correctional rehabilitation as well as for preparation and community management of SA offenders who will be released back into society. As I mentioned before, prior to SH, the perpetrator was involved with the law 12 months prior. And circumstantial information for solved SH cases. This will yield richer SH offender profiles and enable assessment of the characteristics and other factors that could increase the likelihood of a non-lethal sex offender becoming a murderer. Having more comprehensive information is critical to investigating and solving SH cases and for determining potential greater risk factors for sexual perpetrators to reoffend and or escalate to more serious crimes if released from prison, and to identify which parolees may require closer monitoring once they are back in the community. Hence, Lauren with her ex-boyfriend, who was a felony sexual offender, and end up dragging her from walking back from her class into the school parking lot and used a firearm on her. And with that, I just wanted to bring that up, as with what Gary said. It's with mass murders, but I wonder if it applies to single or someone who's killed one. So this is Lauren, and this is the person who he called himself Roland, which he was not. His name was Melvin Roland, and he died of an apparent self-inflicted gunshot wound shortly afterwards in a church parking lot. And here's another, this one right here. This is a more recent one where a teacher was shot and killed by her husband, and then he later ended up shooting himself shortly thereafter as well. So, back to this paper. And this one is done in the United Kingdom. And we're just going to really just quickly go over this. I would just want to show us a few things. So this is stranger sexual homicide and exploratory behavioral analysis of offender crime scene actions. So they're looking to, is there actually a high incidence of stranger sexual homicide? And their findings were like the other one. It's very small, very nominal. Even though this is overseas, it was still a small amount. And this is the Journal of Sexual Aggression. And these two are from the School of Natural Sciences and Psychology, Liverpool John Moore University. And this was received in 2018 and accepted in 2019. And they look into more reflecting of rape and personal sexual assault, overkill, and control. Kind of what the overkill with the stabbings. And as Gary and Ann said, when it becomes like a brutal, excessive stabbing overkill, it is considered a sexual homicide. It's sexual in nature, even though, as MPD said, there was no signs of sexual assault. But with that affidavit written, would they be able to know if there was one or not? And they're looking into the importance of stranger sexual homicide, defined as killing that occur in the context of there being little or no pre-existing relationship between the offender and the victim, such that the victim would not have recognized her assailant the day before the homicide, as the offender's actions may be the only clues available. And that's kind of what they're trying to say on the media, that this is something of like a Brian Koberger type situation, which is very rare, but no one ever saw him. But they said at the same time that he was stalking them, so you can't have it both ways. And this is really detailed. There's a lot of detail in this one. I read it through and it made my head spin. But what I would like to show is, okay, let me see if I got this correctly. So they use this model, and this is the severe injury. And as you go out, it shows how overt it becomes and how covert. So notwithstanding that it is only in the outer circle where there are a range of sexual lower frequency acts, suggests low frequency crime scene actions within a radix structure reflect significant aspects of the crime. As such, they can help illustrate the interpersonal dynamics of stranger sexual homicide. So the body exposed, asphyxiation. So as you go out, even though like bludgeon weapon, disable the victim, disrobe the victim, that even though the further you went up from the severity of the injury, it still reflected that there was some interpersonal dynamic of the stranger sexual homicide. So really were they a stranger? More than likely or not, because of how interpersonal it was. And here's another one. So here's the severity of the injury and controlled, impersonal, overkill, expressive, covert. So even with the expressive covert, so what the hypothesis of physical violence and the overt covert hypothesis of sexual violence applying to stranger sexual homicide suggests that answer to these questions is yes. But this time, using the highest frequency and centrally located action severe injury as a focal point, the crime scene actions divide in such a way as to indicate the presence of instrumental and expressive violence together with overt and covert sexual violence. Of note, however, is the manner in which these actions co-occur, as instrumental violence is accompanied by overt sexual violence. Expressive violence is accompanied by covert sexual violence. So they show two subthemes relating to rape and impersonal sexual assault. Because rape is considered overt. Okay? Overt. And impersonal. Expressive covert is controlled and overkill. So they're expressing their sexual frustration. And it's done covertly, such the bludgeon weapon, the body's moved, disrobing the victim, head injury, visibly naked, or bodies concealed, extreme injury, stabbed, other sex acts. So even though these are controlled and overkill, expressive, covert, but in the instrumental overt, and it's impersonal, such as this. So you have ripped clothing, multiple penetration. You see how there is no type of outside violence. It's all the outside violence, the covert, the expressive, is the head injury, stabbing, the body's moved, they're disabled, extreme injury. But what I really wanted to get into is here. The conclusion. So the notes. 1. Severe injuries involving serious single or repeated blows that require hospitalization and that could have contributed to the death, such as the victim repeatedly punched to the face, rendered unconscious, and hospitalized. Extreme injuries involve violence beyond the necessary to cause death, which is what it sounds like with the Idaho 4. But 2, all data inputted onto the database in the UK is completed in-house in controlled environment by a team of highly trained individuals. Applicants are tested for their attention to detail and ability to identify relevant information prior to employment with SCAS. Recruits undergo several months of training before they are allowed to work autonomously and only after they obtain a highly detailed knowledge of the system. To ensure accuracy and knowledge, the training is rigorous and lengthy, and recruits must show clear understanding of behavioral vagrancies. Initial training is not undertaken on a live database, and staff will not begin working on the live database until they have evidenced their capability to complete inputs accurately, ensuing consistency in decision-making in relation to difficult issues. A quality control guide is utilized by everyone inputting data on the database. where an unusual aspect is encountered for which no precedent has been set. A dedicated, experienced team meets to review the situation and make a decision. This decision is then recorded for future reference to ensure future consistency. Additionally, each inputted case goes through a detailed quality assurance process prior to any analysis taking place. This involves a review of the inputted information in comparison to case details. By an analysis from within the team, and anomalies or errors are fed back to the inputter and amended on the database. I mean, hello. Hello. Amazing. That would be wonderful. So let's look at Staunch Letitia. Now this was filed February 28th, 2022. I believe this case is going on currently in court. I could be wrong, but this is attachment A. And just by looking at Brett Payne's earlier, and then looking at this, the amount of detail, statutes. Granted, there's a child involved, and it's a child under 12, so I understand there is more rigorous needs with that, as was stated in the other paper, but still. You got FBI Agent Cohen, so this must be, once they're in court, you do get the other information, you get the more detailed information. I would be interested to know, to see how the original attachment looked like compared to this one. I just thought of that right now. But, I mean, just look at that. Look at that. Compared to this. So we don't even know how Ethan's body was. We just know it was deceased with wounds later determined. Sharp force injuries. We don't know anything else. We barely even know about Kaylee and Maddie and Xana. And someone else pointed this out. For Xana, they used her personal affects to figure out who she was. They didn't with Kaylee and Maddie. They didn't put that extra information in to know how they knew of them. If you watch the one video that I did of the body cam, and other creators also have noticed this, how one of the officers took a picture with a cell phone of her ID. So let's just do kind of overview of the other one. And this is Untangling Sexual Homicide, a proposal for a new classification of sexually motivated killings. And we'll just briefly go over this. So this is the Journal of Criminal Justice, and we have our 3 researchers, and they're from the Department of Psychology, and this is another United Kingdom. And the purpose is the study aimed to develop an empirical-driven checklist guiding clinicians in the decision-making process that would enable them to determine the functional role of the killing in a newly proposed classification of sexual homicides. So this is them trying to get an actual definition. This was published in 2020. So they used a classical test theory, exploratory factor analysis, and a 2-parameter item response theory were conducted on a sample of 361 male sexual killers assigned as either belonging to the direct or indirect group. The results revealed that an 8-item checklist was the best empirical solution. The items included sadism, followed by the use of sexually related disinhibitors, stalking behaviors, the use of restraints, the presence of post-mortem sexual activity, the presence of other sexual activities and unusual interests following the murder, and the presence of biting were indicative of a direct sexual homicide. Okay. And the conclusions: using the direct-indirect typology automatically directs clinicians to consider how and at what point in the timeline the sexual element and the act of killing were related. This allows to address any arising inconsistencies as well as minimize the risk of either assuming sexual motives in the killing in the indirect cases or not addressing management or sexual urges in the context of extreme violence for direct cases. So they talk about how it's a hybrid offense because it's two different offenses. This is more of the assault and a homicide. We were told it was not a sexual assault. There was no signs of a sexual assault, but here they have here some related disinhibitors, stalking behaviors, the use of restraints, the presence of post-mortem sexual activity, the presence of other sexual activities, an unusual interest following the murder, and biting. I mean, we don't know much. We don't know much of anything. I keep bringing her up. Truth and Transparent, 'cause she does a lot of research. She's so thorough. That's why she does not leave one stone unturned. She has current body cam footage of the university. I want to say it's in the beginning of August, and it shows that the security team that is watching the 1122 King Road house, it's under 24-hour surveillance or security, and they called the officers because a lot of the students that live there now in those houses around the area are all new people for the most part, obviously because of what happened, and they are going over to that house and they are peeing on it. They're pissing on it, on the house, on the rocks, all around that house, which shows, it kind of demonstrates the culture of that university towards the 1122 King Road homicides. It's, in my opinion, pretty telling. So the current issues is new research investigating various aspects of sexual homicide emerging recently has broadened our knowledge regarding this type of offense. These remain outstanding issues that, in our point of view, require further research attention, especially when linking theoretical knowledge to clinical application, which is very important. You need your theoretical knowledge and you also need to apply it. That previous paper we looked at, they are definitely doing that. And our first paper, not so much. In the affidavit we've seen so far, not so much, but they can change, which the second affidavit we saw. So definition. Due to a lack of legal definition, most countries have adopted criteria when studying sexual homicide. These criteria rely entirely on physical evidence readily available at the crime scene or obtained during the investigation. In order for the homicide to be considered sexual, it requires at least one of the following to be met. Victim lacks attire, totally or partially exposed sexual parts of the victim's body. The body is found in a sexually explicit position. An object has been inserted into body cavity. There is evidence of sexual intercourse, and there is evidence of substitute sexual activity, masturbation, ejaculation at the crime scene, or of sadistic sexual fantasies, mutilation. However, to lower incidence of false positives, these two again, introduce more stringent criteria requiring at least two criteria of the FBI's definition to be present in order for the homicide to be considered sexual. In addition to this, some of the newer definitional criteria go beyond physical evidence and include additional factors. Her Majesty's Prison and Probation Service. The suspect has to admit it and then write it in a journal, which, okay. So I keep talking about those two. And let me... right here. So, Chopin and Brugard. And this, I got this article from one of the previous ones as a reference. I just went into the reference of the paper. I'll show you when we go back, and kind of just looked it up, and it got the DOI number right here. Pasted it, and then here's the article. And this is, as I said, Behavioral Sciences and the Law. It was first published August 20th, 2019. And the funding is Swiss National Science Foundation, which is pretty broad. So let's read their abstract. So we've read 3 abstracts. This is theirs. This research investigates violent stranger rapes and the factors leading these cases to sexual homicides. Variables relating to modus operandi characteristics on one part and offender behavior on the other part are examined using conjunctive analysis of cases configuration to identify the different combinations leading to a lethal outcome. Using a French sample of 1,263 cases of violent rapes and 303 cases of sexual homicides involving female adult victims, we find that blows given by offenders and information about physical restraint or physical resistance of victims are strongly associated intentional and non-intentional sexual homicides. Psychoactive substance consumption by offenders as well as social isolation are in a lesser extent also associated with the lethal outcome. What? Huh? So I looked at their references. Boom. 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 So if you're going to write a paper and your references are mostly, it looks like you, that doesn't look good. And there's that. And here's that. Boom. 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 Okay. And that's what I was mentioning before in my previous video. You have to really watch where the information's coming from and why. And now I just lost my spot. Okay. So we went through what the FBI, that Chopin and this guy. Research by, tested whether the majority of sexual homicide cases are in fact reliably captured by the definition. In their study, the authors made sure that with a high degree of certainty there was a sexual element to the killing in their sexual homicide sample, and then examined whether these were the same characteristics highlighted by. The results found support for the utility of adapting the criteria when detecting if the homicide was sexual in its nature, with the most prominent indicators of a sexual element to a killing include exposure of the lower half of the victim's body and evidence of sexual acts. However, from a clinical perspective, the criteria did not allow to distinguish between cases whether the sexual element represented a salient factor in forensic cases, formulation in cases where the sexual act and killing were not closely related. Indeed, in their sample noted homicide cases where the violence was not sexual in nature and the sexual encounter was, in fact, consensual. The homicide was identified as sexual because it occurred in sexual context and physical evidence met one of the criteria. Kind of like an argument that led to killing which commenced after consensual intercourse. So it's more of an interpersonal violence, more of domestic violence. This means that definitions might sometimes be overly inclusive, and clinicians should always fully understand the context in which the killing took place. Amen. All right. So they're looking more of the motivational rationale. Saying that they were angry is problematic because it just describes an emotion. It doesn't really go to the underlying aspect of why. And as Gary was saying, how with these type of mass murders, it's not going to be afterwards the person's going to be like, what happened? Why did this happen? I didn't know what was going on. No, it's a very controlled situation. It's controlled. They go in and they are doing it because they have a reason. It may be impulsive, but it's also controlled. So we're just going to kind of just glaze over this. So intent and motivational aspects for the offending behavior are more often difficult to identify, prove, and even understand. The sexual behavior itself can vary considerably from overt sexual activities which are easily observable at the crime scene to acts which are more obscurely symbolic. Yet, despite these challenges, determining the context in which the offense has occurred is crucial for assessment and case formulation, which is so important for the proper education about being detail-oriented when you see a case such as these. And Ann Taylor definitely is looking at their educational backgrounds. Are they properly educated on such a matter? Understandably, that this is the first homicide in 7 years, and a homicide of this magnitude, this mass murder. A lot of these are talking about looking at these precipitating factors so that you can help de-escalate situations. As the previous paper said, the perpetrator had a instance with law enforcement 12 months prior. So you have to be educated on being able to see the signs and the symptoms of someone in a community that needs to be watched. So the current study, the notion of direct-indirect link is promising and increases the reliability of sexual murders classification. However, in order to improve our ability to adequately classify sexual murders, an empirically driven set of crime scene behaviors need to be developed. An empirically driven set of crime scene behaviors need to be developed. Previous studies have highlighted that trying to classify offending behaviors without a clear standardized set of criteria leads to idiosyncratic list of criteria that varies across clinicians, little consistency, and low reliability. The aim of the current study is to develop an empirically driven checklist that will guide clinicians and professionals in the decision-making processes to determine how the sexual element and the killing are connected. To this aim, the EFA and two-parameter item response theory analysis will be applied. See right there. You have to be able to be trained properly. And they have a sample size here of 361 male sexual killers of ages 14 years or above. And they serve some type of prison sentence. 11 homicides were serial and 350 were non-serial. The criteria for sexual homicide included offenses where a sexual element in the killings were evidence, suspected, or admitted. The sample represented a full data search of all cases stored in the offender assessment system in England and Wales, captured from the beginning of its existence in the early 2000s. Okay. The average perpetrator's age at the time of offense was 28, whereas the average victim's age was 33. The majority of offenders were white, unemployed, or in full-time employment the majority of the offenses occurred between 1980 and the year 2000. So, and this was just done recently. All right. So, if you want to look into this more, let me know. Right now I'm spent. My head's pounding. I'm sure yours is if you're still listening to this. There's a lot to unpack. There was a lot to learn. And this court case is still going on. It's in the prelims. And it'll be interesting to see how, if and when this goes to court. A lot of people feel it won't be going into court. I think a lot of people have the same intention of, if he is the perpetrator of this mass murder next door, that the evidence that they got for him to be the perpetrator is not looking good. But it looks like he is more than likely not. There's really no evidence. And just looking at the research here, it's an acquaintance. He's an acquaintance of the victims, not of the victims who are alive or the roommates. They are a victim of the circumstance, yes, but they're not the victims who are no longer with us and their families. Those are the victims. But I found that interesting that we don't know about Ethan's body, where it's located. And the bathrooms were specifically pointed out to Officer Payne by Officer Smith. So that concludes this video. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe. Thank you to my 2. Shout out to my 2. And I'm going to finish up the part 2. And I'm looking into the grub truck, because there's a part of the grub truck where the 4 that are working inside, mostly the 3, not so much the 4th, but 3 of them were having a conversation, I want to say with someone online, like through their Twitch, about cannibalism. And it was a lengthy conversation about cannibalism. Now, I understand it's Idaho with the whole Donner Party, but still. So I would like to know if anyone knows about that type of culture around there. If anyone from around there, I would find that to be interesting, if that's just something that people talk about. If you were stuck in the cold and you had to survive, would you eat your arm first, or so on and so forth? And that was kind of their conversation. So I'm doing some editing with that. So please stay tuned. Thank you for watching, and until next time.